Someone asked me what supplements someone over 70 should do for optimal health and anti-aging. This is something I've been contemplating making a video about for a while anyway. There's a lot of things promoted for anti-aging that have all kinds of different effects, but I think it's important to look at what the actual limitation of aging is, and it's the stem cells. Over time, these cells die off and our stem cell pool shrink, and they just don't work so well anymore.
Well, why is he so flighty?
There's gotta be some kind of chromosomal damage with a matchup like that.
You've never met anyone with as much willpower as me. And whatever it is you think you're good at in your life, it'd probably take about a year and become an authority in the field in which you think you're good.
Before I get into the meat of the discussion, I want to address a few comments that I've gotten lately. First off, I'll talk about MSN in a dedicated video. And another thing people won't take no for an answer is talking about my credentials and if I even have any scientific knowledge at all. People who don't care can skip ahead to any time if you're choosing. Or even skip directly to the doses section where I will just give the supplements and the other interventions, and I'll explain how to do them, and I'll put it on the screen in a picture so you can just copy that down if you like and just refer to it as like a cheat sheet. For those who stay, I'll try to make this section educational. People often ask me how to read scientific papers and how to learn to and judge what's scientific.
So what is it?
So if this is something you care about, then keep watching. And since Layton Norton, of all people, has talked about this in the past, it's probably a good idea to put a more coherent answer out there. I get a lot of questions about who I am and where I am and so on, and what my credentials are, what do I do for a living. This kind of thing comes in waves, and most of them are probably just in bad faith because I made some other channel mad. They want to vent their feelings on me. Especially one saying, you have no credentials, you're not a doctor, so who cares what you say? But I'm sure some people just genuinely want to know. But just because I don't give out my name and address and exact education doesn't mean these things don't exist. But that's not what this channel is about. It's not about me. This channel is also probably never going to pay the bills, not unless I move to somewhere about 15 times less expensive than where I am now, where it costs $7 a pound for ground beef. Until then, the publicity of running this channel is not going to do me any favors when it comes to actually making money doing other kinds of work. Someone suggested I write a book. In fact, I've gotten that a lot of times, and I do plan to eventually, but even then it is not something that's really worth the time involved from a monetary perspective. You gotta keep in mind I get like $1 or $2 an hour for all the work that I put into this channel, at least, not counting some donations that people have given me, which are pretty generous. You could make $30 an hour here just doing temp work. And only a small percentage of people on the channel are ever going to support the channel financially. Unfortunately, 15,000 subs just isn't very many people, and you can only expect so much. And frankly, I can't imagine any other group this size being so generous. I remember 20 plus years ago when I was in a job interview and things were going very well, which they usually do for me in job interviews. And that was right up until the interviewer grabbed us both some diet sodas from the fridge. I mentioned I tried to avoid aspartame, and he actually laughed at me and told me I was anti-scientific. Much like people today will say people who don't inject highly damaging nanoparticles into their bloodstream annually are science deniers. After that, the interview went very sour, and it was amazing to me to realize that for many people, even highly educated people, science is something they believe in blindly, not something based on testing and observation, which is what it's really about. If you can't test it, it's not science.
What do you think, sirs?
I'm a scientist. I don't think, I observe.
My main field is not directly related to what most people might think important to health topics, but it does teach you topics like biology, medical school, business school, and law school are not going to. Tons and tons of math education. To even start to analyze data, I would think someone would need to have a 400 level statistics course. This is what people in engineering and scientific schools usually have to take. Unfortunately, no one in pre-med, pre-law, business, biology, or chemistry has to take a course like this. There's a much less rigorous one that business majors take, which I wound up taking too, by the way, and a really, really simplistic version that people in health sciences take that I also wound up taking before I knew what I was going to major in, because almost every major has to take that. And that middle school level scientific methods class is about all the analytical skills the average doctor is going to have, aside from whatever their God-given gifts are. I remember in that class I got an 80% on the first test, and I thought I was doing pretty poorly. Then the teacher said it was graded on a curve and read out all the other raw scores. The highest was 100, next was my score, the one after that was 32, and it was mostly single digits after that. And on the next test, I got 100, and the other guy got like 60 or something like that. And then everyone else, again, was behind. Suffice to say that most people dropped out of the course. In fact, tons of people dropped out of my program long before that. I think there's about 80 to 90% dropout rate. Before I even got there, I had to take 7 or 8 math classes already, and that doesn't count the physics classes everyone in the science and engineering section had to take. These are basically math classes with a irritating word problem format that pretty much everyone hated. I didn't mind it too much, but it kind of drove most of the people crazy, because most of them are guys that don't have very good verbal skills. I'm sure I'm missing a few math classes, but for example, to even get that far, I had to take Calc 1 through 3, Linear Algebra 1 and 2, Trigonometry, and 2 courses called something like Advanced Mathematical Topics 1 and 2. I kind of laughed at that name at the time, just calling it Advanced Mathematics, but I definitely didn't laugh while I was taking it. They were a lot harder than the stat course, and I mentioned earlier that so many people had failed out of that one. People didn't fail out of this one because by the time you got there, you weren't someone that's going to be failing out of things. I've been doing a lot of proofs before then because my main field is also kind of mathy too, like extra snuck in math, since clearly I wasn't getting enough math as it was.
You probably sat in math class thinking, there should be more math. This could be mathier.
I had been doing a lot of proofs at that point already and was pretty good at it, but I always had a little doubt here and there if some of them were actually correct. That's when I learned how to not only prove things, but in those classes, I learned how to prove that they're proven. Only then did logic truly click together for me once and for all. That is the only way to not just think logically and present logical arguments that you think are right, but become able to judge logic systematically and objectively.
So he says to me, he says, I work down at the University of Science there. He says, that's a good school, by the way. I can't remember the exact place. But let me ask you a question. He says, do you own a doghouse? So I go, yes, I do. He says, well, then that means you probably have a dog. I said, yes. He says, well, that means you're likely to have a family if you have a dog. I said, yes, I do. He said, well, then that means you got kids, you're married? I said, yes, I am. He says, well, then you're a heterosexual man. I said, yes, sir, I am. He says, well, you see, that's logic there. I asked if simply from finding out you had a doghouse, I made this series of inferences, and I found that you're a heterosexual man.
But I don't say this to toot my own horn.
I hope it doesn't sound arrogant when I say that I am the greatest man in the world. Gentlemen, to the future. Oh, you don't have any glasses? Just pretend.
But so people can ask themselves if the people they listen to really have the amazing authority that many of them proclaim, or that people generally just assume that they have. For example, a certain biology professor has been promoting allulose very heavily lately. He's done some very interesting research with very useful data that factually shows there's many benefits to a low-carb diet and fasting, but he's very wrong about this in my not so humble opinion. What makes him sure he's right? Taking the previous information into account, are you so sure he has the mathematical and logical skills needed to make these snap judgments? What credentials can we blindly put our faith in, if any? And I told you before that science is all about testing. Well, did they really test every single possible problem that allulose could cause you, or any of these other things could cause you? And unfortunately, that they didn't at all. You know, at least though he is a professor and anyone in academia has experience with the academic process, it also forces you to actually look directly at studies both in and out of the classroom. Sadly, this is just not what most people do, even if they're very smart and educated. I think truly understanding the academic process is important in its own right, and people don't realize this is not what medical doctors go through at all. An MD does not have to submit a thesis, neither does a lawyer either. The science knowledge and what little logic and critical thinking ability that these guys attain actually comes from their undergraduate degrees, which are very light on this. Today, this is usually a so-called neuroscience degree, which is essentially a rebranded psychology degree. This was specifically created to make it easier to get a pre-med degree, so we can have doctors today who didn't have to bother much with learning all of that science nonsense, just some minimal chemistry and a bunch of psychology. Then it's off to medical school to learn how to read x-rays, do blood work, memorize endless disease symptoms and anatomy, and then learn how to actually perform procedures. That's why it's hard for me to care what some random medical doctor's opinion is on anything more complicated than that.
How many? 26. Okay, either you suck at math, or you're gonna die in 2 seconds. You suck at math.
But enough bashing on doctors, let's look at lawyers and philosophers for a minute. I had to stop and laugh for a while because I'd never really stopped and thought about just how much math I'd taken. Not just math, but crypto math too. Often I'd take classes in my field or else prerequisites where it was some name where I had no idea what it was going to be. And then I'd realize after the first class or two, oh, well, this is basically going to be yet another math class. Along those lines, I also had to take a 400 level philosophy class, and this was taught by a crazed and power-mad philosophy professor. For visual reference, she looked and sounded almost exactly like Maggie Smith, who played a professor in those Harry Potter movies.
Do you really think it's safe leaving him with these people? I've watched them all day. They're the worst sort of muggles imaginable.
At the time I took it, my university had a supposedly very highly ranked law school, even though it was a state school that no one outside the state has probably even heard of. This class was the logic class that people in pre-law had to overcome to make it into law school. Lots of people actually failed out of the program because of it. You also had to have 2 other logic classes I think everyone at the school had to take. It was Philosophy 101 and 102, I think. Basically, they were baby logic classes, and this was the supposedly hard one. I took it in my last undergrad semester, so for me it was pretty much extraneous by that point. To start off, the professor had her own textbook. You had to sign your signature on a piece of paper to ensure only people who were in the class could get one. I suppose this lady thought that people would buy her $100 textbooks and smuggle them to Mexico and make a profit somehow. Or maybe she thought they'd start a rogue philosophy department of their own. Dark philosophers hell-bent on world conquest. Who knows? Of course, when I went to get mine, there was someone in front of me, and the lady pointed at the piece of paper and claimed he had already gotten his textbook and paid for it, and he couldn't get another one because the place where he would have to sign was already signed. I suggested perhaps someone else had signed in the wrong place on the sheet, which would not only be an obvious mistake to make, but very easy to check. No, she said, she never makes mistakes. As such, she refused to even check. And this is a true story, by the way. Of course, it turned out that was the issue, but we wasted about 10 minutes arguing with her, and eventually I just asked to go first and only learned for sure that I was right later on after asking the other student about it. I bring her up for a few reasons. First off, it was sort of funny, though it was very infuriating. But more importantly, it's easy to have not just too much confidence in credentials in general, but perhaps most importantly, you can easily have false confidence in your own credentials, or start thinking that they apply to just everything that there is, no matter how ridiculous that is.
But I'm better than every other. Better than no one. A man gets what he earns when he earns it.
Ironically, the more education you go through, the more susceptible you are to this failing. I mean, who would dare to even question this campus big shot who is considered one of the most important professors of the entire school? In fact, maybe the most important one. She herself didn't dare. Thankfully, in my actual work, your initial ideas seldom, if ever, prove to be totally correct, no matter how logical they are. Results are always a little surprising, or else there's some kind of error that you made along the way, and you're going to have to correct it. So that keeps me a bit more grounded in reality than a lot of the people who don't have this kind of daily ego check, who just think that they're always right about everything all the time.
Remember, thou art mortal! Remember, thou art mortal!
Oh, blow it out your...
Unfortunately, while we get the basics of philosophy and logic from ancient Greece, in modern times it is heavily infected with all kinds of nonsense. Ever since the time of Hegel, things like logical consistency are no longer a given in philosophy. Instead, we have dialectics, so-called critical theory, and so-called Marxist philosophy. Sartre, for example, who I'm sure you've heard of, was a Marxist philosopher. That's what he called himself, not a label I'm applying. So it's just about every influential philosopher in the last century or more, and so are most of the professors for that matter. Critical theory is also where critical race theory comes from. So to give an example of logical inconsistency, these so-called philosophers will say there's no such thing as race, then immediately say everyone's a racist, except certain people, and no logical consistency is required at all, and in fact they specifically warn against it and make up nonsense justifications for that. In other words, it's not really logical, it's arbitrary. That is, it means whatever they feel like it means, and you just have to go along with it. And whatever agenda that they dreamed up last week, you just have to go along with it, even if they're going to change it next week. That's the way it is with lawyers too. After all, that's the people that are training our lawyers. They claim to be logical. In fact, many of them have an amazing degree of arrogance about their education. They went to a fancy school like Harvard, which is a piece of trash today anyway, or about their intelligence and about their logical abilities. In reality, like doctors, their basic foundational education in logic and mathematics is totally underwhelming. The legal system is largely arbitrary, and so is the so-called logic of its practitioners, including the judges. I helped someone with a pro se case a couple of years ago, and we won it completely and resoundingly, by the way, without spending any money on legal fees. In one motion, their lawyer said the law is such and such. Well, no, it wasn't. That's not the law. It's just a precedent in another case that is an arbitrary tradition that does not have to be followed.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is not opposite day. Whatever verdict you come back with will be literally interpreted as the verdict.
Do you guys not get that?
Hey, I will hold you in contempt.
Thank you. I mean, boo.
Sit down.
Today, very few judges, if any, literally interpret the Constitution anymore. They interpret it as they see fit, i.e., it's arbitrary. It's not real law or real logic, but a sort of quasi-logic. The ancient Greeks called this sophistry, and there was a rival group of philosophers to the famous ones we know, who had very compelling arguments, but they did not have rigorous logical consistency, and they were called the sophists. Because of this, in practice, they did more to mislead people than to point the way to the truth, and this was probably largely their intention. Unfortunately, a lot of the so-called science funded by industry today is intentionally constructed in this manner to lend weight to nonsensical but profitable ideas, such as sugar or fake sugar being good for you. It's important to be aware of this because even when trying to apply logic yourself in good faith, subtly wrong or imprecise logic or the wrong sort of analysis can lead to very wrong conclusions.
Let me ask you a question. Do you own a doghouse? And the guy goes, no, I don't own a doghouse. So the guy says, oh yeah, you're one of them.
So hopefully you are now leery of people hiding behind credentials, and even the danger of becoming overly enamored of your own credentials. Doctors and lawyers, and sometimes even professors, don't have the authority many people credit them with, or that they often try to claim, let alone some guy like Lane Norton with a PhD in exercise science. I wouldn't trust a guy like him to clean out my car's ashtray properly, and I don't even smoke. And that's even if I made the assumption that he was completely honest.
Which is the greatest quality of knighthood? It must be truth. Above all. When a man lies, he murders some part of the world. You should know that.
I've been talking up such a storm I had to take a break, but you may still be wondering, what's science?
So what is it?
I think we've experienced this period of time before, sir.
Only joking.
And that one.
I picked on doctors, lawyers, even philosophers, but now I will pick on business, economics, and finance for a bit. Why not? As they get more advanced, these guys actually do learn quite a bit of mathematics. However, they can also be led astray because in economics and business, you're looking mainly at trends and indicators. That is, possibilities, not facts. This also is a large part of what informs business decisions on medications. Does it affect symptom X, Y, or Z? If it does, then it's going to be a billion-dollar success. If not, it's useless for them, even if it made you live longer. Unfortunately, that says nothing about the overall picture. That's why cancer medications used to have to conduct longevity studies on recipients. If the people live longer, that's the real indicator of whether it's helping. And that's the gold standard for science. In medicine, they will say that an RCT or a randomized controlled study is the gold standard. That is an experiment where something is changed in one group and not in the other, and the two groups are compared. The problem here is that they usually only look at specific markers and then say, well, this marker's improved, so therefore their outcome is going to be improved. But that's not necessarily true. It's only a quarter truth because the conclusions only apply to what actually is measured. If you didn't measure life expectancy, you can't say it's safe. If you didn't measure increase in cancer rates, increase in autoimmune conditions, or that the IQ of your children are going to be the same on average whether you take it or not, then you're just assuming that these things are safe in this respect. You don't have any proof at all. You also have the issue of poison control groups. Many of the studies promoting fake sugars do have data showing they do good things compared to sugar. Just like most rat studies, they have this rat chow diet, and then they say, oh, well, this worked out better than this other diet. It's like, well, it's not really a natural diet, is it? Not to mention that rodents, for example, really don't normally have fat in the diet, so they really don't respond to it properly. For example, they'd have to eat 99% fat in order to go into ketosis. And most of these studies don't look at safety or long-term effects in any way. And that doesn't even mention the fact that fake sugars like allulose block zinc absorption and other mineral absorption. And zinc is one of the most important antioxidant molecules to the human body. So if you're deficient in it, you're going to age a lot faster. And this is going to have serious negative health effects on the body over time. You simply just don't get the whole picture with these kind of narrow keyhole studies.
Nice. Not thrilling, but nice.
You may have some good effects, but you can easily have negative effects that outweigh them. So if it's something that's pretty natural, we don't expect all these negative effects. But when we have this kind of artificial crazy stuff that has many potential problems, if you don't specifically measure each and every one of them, you don't know it's safe. The stuff they measure also might not be made the same way for these labs as the stuff that you actually get either. The lab stuff is often very expensive and made wholly synthetically in tiny batches by experts in a sophisticated university lab that are sure that it's extremely pure. But do you get this same luxury? Where does your allulose come from? Like the mRNA and the jib-jab, what you get is actually made biosynthetically from GMO black mold, and it is not very pure at all. It's contaminated with neurotoxins. It's also going to have a ton of random chemicals and proteins in every batch due to mutation generation to generation. That's going to be totally untested, and in fact it's totally unknown what's even in there. How could anyone claim it's safe or that they even know what's in it? On top of all of this, independent verification and replication of results is one of the most essential aspects of science. You might think this is what peer review is, but it's the opposite. Peer review is just there to hide the actual data from outside eyes, and only the people who have the right credentials and the right connections, i.e. they get money from the industry, are going to be allowed to see it at all. There are some presumably fraudulent ESP studies that are never replicated independently that seem to show ESP is real, and therefore the results are totally ignored. Well, guess what? No medication trials are ever replicated independently. It is all based on data from the company itself or someone they hired to generate it, and no one not financially tied to them even gets to look at it. And the data really only proves a trend, not an endpoint. A few health markers of questionable validity improve for a few weeks. A few others don't get worse in said time. That's it. Plus, the control group is often poison, like with the mRNA trials. The control group was not an injection of saline, but an injection of the same nanoparticle delivery system that the jabs would use. What if it turns out nanoparticles are damaging to your T cells and other delicate cells like ovaries? And we already know that it is from other experiments. Well, it's a big problem, and this was intentional fraud in my opinion, and really what it is a criminal act. In fact, these companies have been convicted of felonies many times, but even when they are, no one actually goes to jail. The company gets fined, or more likely a subsidiary with no operating cash to pay off any fines gets fined, and then it just folds up when they get fined, so no one actually pays the fine. And that's exactly how it is with all the studies we see on nutrition science. This kind of statistical analysis has meaning in economics and marketing, but it is not experimental and therefore of no value in actual science because it doesn't prove anything. Plant peddlers will conduct a study that shows the average person is very unhealthy, then show that people who don't eat meats are a little healthier. This is really misleading though, because the average person also eats a ton of sugar, bread, and other garbage. It's also cherry picking because they only look at the health markers that suit them, such as cholesterol, not the ones that are unfavorable like the glutathione level, which is notoriously low on a plant-based diet. Since these are cherry-picked markers and an invalid comparison group, and there's no validity to these markers being used as a sign of optimized health anyway, they're just disease markers that when you have really weird ones, it sometimes means there's a problem. There's literally zero useful conclusion to be had from any of this. Perhaps worse is that most studies are short-term. Almost no studies show experimental lifespan increase in humans. Typically, industry-funded studies are very short studies that show weak evidence that conflicts with much stronger evidence from much longer-term studies. So this is obviously done intentionally and in bad faith. If you run 100 studies, some of them will show some results, especially if they're short-term. So don't fall for corporate so-called science.
It's got electrolytes.
What are electrolytes? Do you even know?
It's what they use to make Brondo.
Yeah, but why do they use them to make Brondo?
Because Brondo's got electrolytes.
The other day, someone commented, "I'm not the authority on science, and I was 100% wrong about vitamin C, and there's hundreds of studies supporting its use." Well, even if you believe that, well, fine, just go take it. You don't have to do everything that I say. But I mean, what credentials would you like? Why do you think that they are an authority just because they have them? Second, most of the nonsense people believe comes from watching TV. And what magic credentials do the newscasters and writers have? Or the people at Newsweek telling you about some study they never read? And how much money do advertisers make from products that benefit this narrative? And is that the real reason these things are even on TV? And did they look at animal lifespan to find it increases when supplementing vitamin C? Oh wait, they looked at lifespan and it actual decreases in animal studies, but somehow it's supposed to be healthy for you. That's kind of strange, don't you think? Yes, you have many studies that claim vitamin C has some benefit at large doses, but does it also have negative effects? And keep in mind this is an antioxidant, and there's endless antioxidants in the body. Almost everything in the description is an antioxidant, including zinc orotate, except these are ones that aren't going to damage you in any way. And they don't mention that vitamin C degrades to oxalate in the human body, or that it blocks zinc absorption just like allulose does, and that this is going to have a pro-aging and pro-inflammatory effect. And of those studies, how many are experimental studies at all? Well, most of them are just sloppy junk science based on statistics, and they have some kind of data there which is meaningless, and then they just put an opinion on there like, gosh, vitamin C is great. I've seen so many studies like that, it's ridiculous. This data is also often massaged when it doesn't suit the bias of the people who are promoting it. You could promote sugar in exactly the same way, and they do. Sugar makes you retain water so you can claim it's hydrating, and they do that. Of course, they don't tell you that when you up the dose a little bit, it's actually very dehydrating, and this is why people get a diabetic coma. Their organs become dehydrated. Plus, it has endless other bad effects.
Well, since you've been frozen, there have been fabulous advances in the field of dentistry.
What do you mean?
Nothing. Oh, look, here's Basil.
I hope I didn't bore you guys too much. A lot of people have asked me to talk about how to read a scientific study and about credentials in general, or specific to myself, so I hope it wasn't too boring. I guess it just goes to show it's important to be careful what you wish for.
Then one of us, probably.
Sander, Well, I didn't know it was gonna happen. I just thought there were gonna be dances and songs. I just wanted to make sure we'd work out, get a happy ending.
A while back, one of the oldest people alive passed away at about 115 years old. Her cause of death answered an interesting question about the ultimate limitation of human lifespan. She didn't die of any malady per se, like heart disease or cancer. She was simply unable to make more red blood cells due to a lack of stem cell activity. She just ran out of the ability to renew these cells and couldn't continue on. This is important to realize because while there are many metrics of aging, it gives us something to focus on. Even better, it applies to all organs in the body. So whether you're worried more about skin quality or kidney function, this is what you need to preserve in order to keep your cells youthful as you age. This is also the main factor that affects both your hair coloring and hair loss over time, which I know is important to many people. Interestingly, your stem cells generally stay in areas of the body with very little oxygenation. This is so that when toxins and pathogens enter the bloodstream, your stem cells are not at risk. Remember, your stem cells are forever. Other cells all come from these progenitors. They might eventually be unable to split on their own, but that's when stem cells come into play, and then the stem cells migrate anywhere in the body and become almost any type of cell, and they rejuvenate any organ in the body if it's unhealthy. Fasting 72 plus hours is a good way to trigger this form of healing since it releases stem cells into the body. Fasting also increases the telomere length of cells, including the telomere length of stem cells. Telomeres are a control mechanism inside cells to keep them from splitting after they've become too old or damaged, which could lead to cancer. There's a little extra DNA at the end of your DNA strands that shrinks each time a cell replicates, and once it runs out, the cell is simply not going to split anymore. Stem cells have no purpose at all except to differentiate into other cell types and then divide into more cells of that type to replace damaged ones. So if their telomeres are gone, then they're just totally useless. But fasting can actually restore these telomeres to these cells that would otherwise be totally worthless. Fasting also increases mitochondrial health, and it requires a lot of energy for cells to divide, so it's particularly important for stem cells to have healthy mitochondria. This is also true because once stem cells are released into the bloodstream, they emit large numbers of mitochondria, which then enter other cells and contribute to cell health throughout the whole body. Since there's little or no oxygen in the niches stem cells reside in before being deployed, these cells produce energy through a process of fermentation. This is only safely accomplished using alpha-ketoglutarate as the substrate, and that is why alpha-ketoglutarate is useful as an anti-aging supplement. It becomes even more important as we age because our natural levels go down and down. So if you're older, you might want to consider an even higher dose than standard. Recently, I've doubled my own dose. Many other supplements will also help here, including most of the ones in the description of the video with affiliate links. The purpose of antioxidant-like supplements is mainly to stop the damage of free radicals that drives damage to mitochondria and to stem cells. Supplements that will help here are taurine, glycine, and cysteine, bilberry powder, inositol, creatine, the carnosine precursor Beta Alanine, which works much better than actual carnosine, zinc orotate, orotic acid, niacin, which should always be taken with an equal amount of betaine anhydrous. There's also PQQ, which is an obscure nutrient that increases mitochondrial function. Urolithin A also has a similar but probably better effect in mitochondrial health, but it's pretty expensive. CoQ10 also helps, but if you eat red meat, you probably get enough already. Astaxanthin is a nutrient found in crustaceans, and that's what gives flamingos their pink color. So all of the plant-based people who say eat the rainbow, well, you can eat the animal rainbow too. And actually, it's going to have a lot better health effects than eating the plant rainbow. Astaxanthin also has amazing ability to be reused over and over again as an antioxidant in your mitochondria. It can be found in shrimp, lobster, and wild-caught salmon, but just because it looks red doesn't mean that it has real astaxanthin, because a lot of them are dyed. So if it's not really wild-caught, it's probably not going to be useful. And you can probably take as much of this as you want. Just be aware you could turn pink yourself if you take it too far. Vitamin K2 is also able to save mitochondria, and that's a little known benefit of its intake that I only discovered during one of the videos I was making on it. Today there's much less K2 in animal products than in the past, making supplementation critical, especially as we age. Hyaluronic acid is known for its benefits for the skin, but taken internally, it also helps a great deal with preserving mitochondrial function and even liver function. Aspirin can also help your mitochondria, one of its many surprising benefits. Some have said that aspirin will cause tinnitus, but that's kind of like saying wearing sunglasses causes blindness. You might find symptoms worse while taking aspirin because it preferentially vasodilates some blood vessels more than others, and this can have some slightly odd effects sometimes, but the idea that it permanently damages your ears is kind of far-fetched. Vitamin D is also critical for mitochondrial health and just about everything else in the human body. Methylene blue is another way to preserve stem cells and mitochondrial function. Just don't overdo it or you could get some side effects. I take about 5 milligrams a day, and in some people's even lower doses may be needed to avoid side effects because they don't clear it easily from their kidneys. And of course, fasting and a low carb diet are going to greatly help your mitochondria. For that matter, so is jumping on a trampoline, and anything that I didn't think of at this stage I'll put later on in the video. I'll put it up as text on the screen. When you jump on a trampoline, this causes succinate release in your fat cells that leads to the creation of new mitochondria, interestingly. So ladies, don't be afraid to express yourself a little bit and be a bit of a tramp.
1, 2, 3, 4.
It's not just supplements that can affect your mitochondrial health or fasting, but also diet. Plant peddlers push vitamin C very hard because the ones who actually have some kind of brains and have studied more thoroughly know antioxidant status is a giant Achilles heel of plant-based health foods. In fact, old videos by Dr. Greger openly discuss this fact. This is also a reason they push polyphenols so hard, and I admit that some plant polyphenols are a good thing. That's why I take bilberry extract powder. This is one of the most concentrated polyphenol sources, and it's one that doesn't absorb in the bloodstream, which is actually something you do not want when you're taking this stuff. And it's shown to have many benefits, including life extension in animal studies. The reason for this may surprise you, and it's because plant foods are deficient in the most important nutrients for your antioxidant status, such as taurine, zinc, copper, carnosine, glycine, and methionine. Methionine is the protein the body uses to make cysteine, but it's really cysteine that your body craves. This is needed to make glutathione, and there's very little of it in plant-based proteins, and that's part of why, for example, people on a keto diet are shown to have up to 4 times as much ability to produce glutathione as people on a vegan diet. After all, how are you supposed to make glutathione without its 2 most important components, glycine and cysteine? Even heavy meat eaters are deficient in glycine compared to our ancestors today if they don't take in plenty of beef or chicken broth and or dishes like fish soup. Keep in mind that back in the day, we ate literally everything from the animal. We didn't just eat steaks and hamburgers. That's just the beginning of the problems with carbs though. Vitamin C blocks mineral absorption, causing issues with both zinc and copper levels. Therefore, supplementing it makes your antioxidant state much worse in the long run, not better, because these two minerals are some of the main controllers of this. Anti-nutrients common in grains essentially almost totally block out mineral absorption when you take them with a meal. So that's another really big concern. In fact, glucose itself also does a lot to block out mineral absorption, which is yet another reason to limit it in the diet. Ultimately, burning carbs in mitochondria causes more reactive oxygen species production than burning fat. At least 66% more than fat burning, and often much higher. While it's commonly believed we get almost all of our energy from carb burning, in reality most energy production is from burning NEFAs, aka fat, and some of it is also from burning alpha-ketoglutarate, which I mentioned earlier. When we're in ketosis, the number can go from 80+% burning of fat to over 95% burning fat. We're born in ketosis, and we're also in ketosis when breastfeeding, contrary to what a lot of people will say. And if we eat a low-carb diet for life like our ancestors, then we'd be in moderate ketosis essentially forever. They say cortisol can turn your hair gray, and this is absolutely true. It can also make you bald if it's high enough. That's because the effect it has on mitochondria, causing your stem cell to deploy prematurely without replicating a replacement first. This means they're lost forever, unfortunately. Thankfully, when you fast and or eat very low carb, this process is short-circuited even when cortisol is high, because insulin is low, and therefore cortisol is able to use fat to create ketones and blood glucose. Otherwise, when insulin is high and your body needs more glucose, it's forced to burn lean tissue, and this includes your stem cells, and you permanently lose them. Glycation is another big problem for your stem cells, and glycation from a high carb diet is also one of the main causes of the physical signs of aging, like wrinkles. And who wants to live forever if they're not going to look good?
Bottoms up. Now a warning. Now a warning? Take care of yourself. You and your body are going to be together a long time.
People often ask me about peptides too. These are hormonal peptide chains that signal cells in the body to take certain actions. Most of these are found in the human body already, such as thyroid hormones. Surprisingly, many new ones are found every single year. There are many reasons to be wary of them though, including the fact that some of them are now biosynthetically made, and this means injecting them could result in a serious and life-threatening allergic reaction. And yes, you generally have to inject most of them, or they're digested into useless components by stomach acid, and this is another drawback. An exception here is BPC 157, and you could consider taking it this way, but it's going to have much less effect. I'd avoid most of them regardless, especially since there's no guarantee they're legitimate, but the mitochondrial boosters are very tempting ones. My mitochondria are probably in pretty good shape from all the fasting, but if I were older or sicker, then I might consider the ones that boost mitochondria. These should have very few problematic side effects, if any, just like the BPC 157 probably doesn't have any side effects as long as it's legitimate. If they are legitimate, you should be able to get lots of benefits and probably take quite a bit of it without any problems. There's quite a few of these peptides, including some derived from the mitochondria themselves, such as MOTS-C, humanin, SHLP 1 through 6. These peptides support and protect the mitochondria themselves, and thus will have many long-term health benefits if they're applied frequently, but keep in mind they're not cheap. SS31 is another one that protects mitochondria from damage, and if I were richer and braver, I would also try dihexa, which stimulates BDNF in the brain. aka brain-derived neurotrophin factor. And this leads to the creation of new neurons in the brain, new connections, and also healthier mitochondria within the brain. These are amino acids already found in the body that work on a cellular level as peptidal hormones, and in the mitochondria in particular. So they should generally be very safe if they're genuine and uncontaminated. Some others can be quite dangerous though, such as one that affects your kidneys, which is known to actually kill people. So don't go down this route lightly.
I'm in. All of it. Always bet on black. Wesley Snipes, passenger 57.
It's around 100,000 on black.
Did you really just wink at him?
Did you really just lose $100,000?
Something I've wanted to do for a long time is get a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. These range from $10,000 to $100,000 for home users. The idea is to increase pressure and take in pure oxygen and then supersaturate your blood with this pure oxygen, force it into the cells, which accelerates healing a great deal and causes a great deal more cellular respiration. This is going to have a lot of benefits for healing, mitochondrial health, and also for cancer. This therapy proceeds in a pattern where pressure is increased for a short time, then slowly reduced to normal. At increased pressure, more oxygen saturates the blood, but after a while, your body will slow down its intake of oxygen into the cells themselves. So you have to reduce the pressure again to stop this effect, and then you can start all over again.
In both cases, the mild pressure group and in the high pressure group, we saw a lot of different mitochondrial changes that were associated with a decrease in glucose metabolism and an upregulation of fat metabolism, making our mitochondria more ready to accept fat molecules, which would allow them to burn at a higher rate and actually produce much more ATP more efficiently. In the lower pressure group, we also saw precursors of a variety of different increases in osteogenic and fibroblastic markers. In other words, indications that the mild pressure group is stimulating cartilage repair, soft tissue repair, and even bone repair. And while we know hyperbaric is capable of stimulating soft tissue repair and bone repair, studies that have assessed that have only looked at higher pressure, 2 to 2.5 atmospheres, and its effect on fibroblast activity and collagen synthesis. Here are some lower pressure indications that it's also stimulating on the DNA and epigenetic level the stimulation of these genes associated with collagen repair, soft tissue repair, and bone repair.
This has been shown experimentally to have many anti-aging benefits and is definitely something I want to try one day, if I ever become fabulously wealthy, that is.
I'm going to have a treasure bath! Treasure bath! Do it! Do it to me!
At this point, I'll just put up an image of the doses of the supplements and list the other interventions too, and describe a bit about how to do them. This way you won't have to hunt them down through a ton of videos. After a few minutes of silence, I'm going to summarize the video.
So have you got any more advice?
No, I don't have any more advice. I've given you all of my good advice.
This is definitely the longest video I've ever done. In fact, it's well over an hour, and I'll probably have to cut some material out. So good news for the people who like long videos, and terrible news for everyone else. But this is a one-time thing. I'm not going to be making really long videos in the future. And for those people, they could have just skipped to the summary section, which I try to include in each video, or go to the previous section, which is where I detailed doses and supplements and other interventions. And if you watch the video again, you can go straight to that section and just look visually and see what you need to do. And this is the stuff you could do if you're 70 plus and want to maximize your health. And some of those changes, like going up to 6 grams a day of alpha-ketoglutarate instead of 3 grams, I've already done. For me, the others are mostly a matter of money. That is, not having enough to do the things like high dose urolithin A anytime soon, or just that I can't be bothered like taking a whole ton of creatine or taking a whole ton of glycine, because you could go up to like 15 or 20 grams or even more, especially on the glycine. And not to mention the massive, crazy expensive hyperbaric oxygen chamber, but I hope someday I'll be able to afford one of those too. And since Layne Norton has a hilarious Learn How to Think Like a Scientist course or video or some kind of nonsense, I thought that I should give my opinion on the matter. It also gave me a good chuckle, and sometimes people ask me for stuff like that. And this week, for some reason, a lot of people have also had little comment tantrums about the usual things, asking if I'm a doctor, saying I don't know science, and vitamin C is the best thing in human history, allulose is the best thing in human history, saying I don't have credentials, and all the usual fatiguing subjects all at once. And also a lot of people keep asking about MSM, and I'll talk about why you shouldn't take that at some point, I guess, though I think it should be a little bit obvious. But the thing is, I'm just not here to answer questions about me or my methods, and I can't explain things to 50 different people who ask the same thing. That's why I make the videos. I'm just here to show people a little data here and there and give some opinions, and then they can go from there and either try it out or go research on their own. If they want to be on the sugar diet and get cancer anyway after all of these videos, then I don't really care, and it was probably meant to be. Lately there's been a big controversy about Dr. Mike Israetel, and that's another reason I wanted to talk about credentials and science. To me, the best comment anyone had on the subject was that if someone gets a degree in BS, don't be surprised when the work they do in it is BS. I went to school in the 90s too, and things were much different then. Only about 1 in 10 people had a degree, and about 50 years before that, only about 1% of the population had a degree. And I think that the standards have just gone down and down and down over time. Nowadays, I think it's something like 1/3 of Americans have a degree, even though most of this is like some University of Phoenix BS that, you know, it's a multiple choice degree. And you see advertisements for universities on bus stops today, right next to the Ozempic ads. Most people are also unaware you can get an online degree at virtually any school today without ever setting foot there. That's been very common for people in the military for a long time, for example. This includes places like Harvard and all the supposedly good schools that have massively dropped in quality in the last few decades. So even if someone has all the right degrees and took real science classes, it really doesn't mean anything today. It might just be total nonsense. On the other hand, one of the most important things I did learn in school is from one of my professors, who amazingly has been a professor at the same school for over 50 years now. He said no one can force you to learn anything, but no one can stop you from learning anything either. That really changed my thinking about learning, and that's when I really started to study things on my own a lot and to do projects that no one ever graded or even saw. And I think that's what really solidified not so much my knowledge, but my critical thinking ability, along with all the math and logic classes, of course. And keep in mind, subjects like fasting and supplements and anti-aging are not something you can learn about in school anyway. Not much anyway. You have to read the studies and find the data, and that's what I really care about, especially when it comes to fasting. But I do think supplementation today, with all the supplements available, has a lot to offer. There are many things lacking in the modern diet and many other things made inside the body which decline over time but are critically important, such as alpha-ketoglutarate. Supplementing them can't make you immortal, but it should keep you subjectively younger, and you just may live a bit longer too.
You just bought yourself another week. Go home and get some rest.